Okay, so I just wanted to do a short video on science and how it's supposed to work. So essentially, you build a hypothesis, so it's an educated guess about something you observe in the world and you're trying to understand. So you create this hypothesis that has to be a testable hypothesis. So from using a statistical sense, you go out and you create an experiment that will test this, and then you have the data, and so, but you have to be really careful with how you create that hypothesis. So, in terms of facilitated communication, watching those videos and meeting people who are typing are all pieces um, that would help you observe and create uh, a hypothesis and an experiment to test that hypothesis. So when Doug Bicklin got back to the United States, he was at the University of Syracuse in New York, and he had a therapist working with him, Marilyn Chadwick. She is a speech therapist, and is very good at doing facilitated communication. And so, of course, they were so excited because it's such a huge deal. If you have a non-speaking child and all of a sudden, and they don't communicate and you have no idea what's going on, all of a sudden they start, learning things and being able to communicate. And for some kids, it's a pretty easy transition. For other kids who are maybe have more difficulty with regulation, it's not like this, Pandora's, magic cure. There's still a lot of work that you have to do, but it's huge because the kids can communicate. So when Doug Bicklin got back to the States, they started doing some trainings for people. And I think they would say that it was so early on and they weren't really sure what they were doing, other than that there was that touch piece and that resistance, and a letter board, and like my experience with Chris, he typed Rafi, and it was so clear that he was communicating that from his behavior and his motoric. I wish I could bottle that in some way and show people, but his motoric intent, all of those things came together, and it made sense. But it wasn't like he started typing, War and Peace, or right away, or even communicating much with us. We really didn't get to communicate with him much before he died. But let's backtrack to the scientific method and what was done to test the typing stuff. And so there was an experiment that was created where there was a board that went down the middle of a table, and then there was the support person on one side, the typer on the other, and then a picture was shown. And what pretty much happened was, I think there might have been one or two like misspelled words that might have been the picture, but pretty much what was typed was what the person who was facilitating saw, the support person. And so I look at that, from my experience with Chris, I don't think you can say that he didn't type, but if you had put him in a position, an experimental position like that, I know he wouldn't have, been able to pass. We just hadn't been able to, maybe if we'd worked on it for a year, then he might be able to. There's actually a book, and I'll try and find it and let you know, that same test, there was an individual who was at Syracuse, and he wanted to be able to pass the test. And so he worked on it. It's Meyer Shervin, and I forget the name of the student, or his typer. but they went through the whole process, and I think it might be in Doug Bicklund's book, Autism and the Myth of the Person Alone, but I'll find it and let you know. But he did. It took him 2 years. They practiced, and it wasn't like the same picture all the time, but he just needed to practice. And I think there's something, if you read the words of folks who type to communicate, it's very poetic. It's just very different, and it's a question that I haven't been able to quite understand. Like, what part of the brain does poetry come from? But and actually Tito wrote a couple poetry books, but it's very poetic. It sounds like poetry. It's kind of flowery, and so I think just the way it's like description words. For example, when Meyer and the typer were going through this testing, Meyer, what was it? Oh, on one of their first trials, he said something about, it was a chimney, I believe, and he said something about how it was something that fire came out of, but not, a stove, a chimney. And so it was more of a description kind of thing. And so he had to practice that. And he was eventually able to pass. And so how can you, if you're independent and if you pass the test, how can you say that it's not true? But the problem is that in reality it should be, because we observe all these things, that there should be funding opportunities. And in this day and age, the cost of running a project is just unbelievably expensive. You have to do the IRB, you've got to do a bunch of different things. And so to do it on your own is just really expensive. I'm hoping to raise some monies to do a couple projects, but I don't know if I'll get there. But so you're observing this, that what those studies showed is that there's definitely influence. What those studies didn't show was that there's never valid communication that happens this way, in this manner. And I know that it does from personal experience. So I just wanted to kind of give you a feel for the science piece of it. And it's like, well, why doesn't somebody just go out and do this? Well, because people write up grants and they get turned down. Facilitated communication is just a bunch of crap. So there's no opportunity to develop, who's a good candidate, what's the best technique, how to do it. It just becomes, it shouldn't be that way, because science is, at its heart, we should be working to understand what's going on in this method. And that's part of why I went back to school, it's like, what the heck, why do you need to bring the letterboard to someone? Why don't they just, if they can communicate, why can't they just walk up to the board and communicate? And why would you need resistance to the muscle? And if you go over the brain connectivity, it makes sense. I'm not going to get into it a lot now, but we'll talk about different things. And if you choose to be in one of my webinars, I can share more information with you. So the next video we're going to go to, I'm going to show you a little boy with autism who is it's his first time using a spoon, and a little girl, my daughter, it's her first time using a spoon. They're different in ages, but the common factor is that it's their first time using the spoon.